Hello listeners of Illusion. Yes, this is another apology. I'm afraid we're still having a few audio issues with Martineau's microphone. However, we are almost at our Patreon goal and soon we'll be able to afford a brand spanking new microphone. So that's good. And speaking of patrons, we'd like to thank a few of you now. We'll start off with David N. Rabbit, who is backing us at the Keeper of the Book of Quests level, David Thompson, who is backing us at the Dungeoneer level, and Peter Pulsford, who is backing us at the Advisor level. If you'd like to hear your name read out, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/nightmarepod at the Dungeoneer level or above. And please bear in mind, we do record this quite far in advance, so you might not hear your name straight away. And to the rest of our patrons and our listeners, thank you very much. We really couldn't do this without you. And now, on with the episode! Welcome, listeners of Illusion, to Temporal Discussion. Welcome, listeners of Illusion, to Temporal Discussion, the episode-by-episode Nightmare Retrospective podcast. I am one half of the Gestalt entity known as the Two Night Martins, Martin Harder.
And I'm Martin O'Doney, and while I am the other half of Mr. H's Gestalt, I am definitely not his other half.
And today we're looking at Series 2 episode... No, we're not. It's got off to a flying start, as usual.
It's as smooth as any I can remember.
And today we're looking at Series 2, Episode 7, which was originally broadcast on October the 17th, 1988. Our number one movie at the box office is the British comedy A Fish Called Wanda, and Whitney Houston's One Moment in Time is still topping the singles chart.
I like The Fish Called Wanda. Yeah, I thought Kevin Kline was brilliant in it.
Yeah, my favourite scene is where he's hanging John Cleese out of the window.
Yeah, you wait for it to turn upside down to actually realise that he's being hung out of the window. Yeah, there's some really good gags in that one. But the Michael Palin thing with the stutter, it was meant to be sympathetic, but I think it probably would offend quite a few people these days, unfortunately. But I still liked it for all of that.
Did you ever see Fierce Creatures?
Yes, I did. Inferior, but it still had some good moments in it. Oh, did you know that the working title for Fierce Creatures, because it reunited the same cast, they were originally going to call it Fish 2.
Can't think why they changed it.
But you'll be able to use that information in so many situations. I promise you, I've set you up for life.
And now, time turns, the recording light burns, time out is gone, the podcast is on.
Welcome, watchers. Settle back and take a firm grip of your chairs now, for this is the time of adventure. But first, how goes our game of Deadly Dungeon versus Daring Heroes? Watch now, you curious lot, as Traegard turns back the dungeon clock. In phase before, the 4 Kentish men went questing through my dungeon den, and though they won a game of chess, the dungeon gave them little rest. A maid they met, a crone as well, who conjured up a useful spell, but tricked them with her witch's lore and dumped them in a monster's maw. They escaped, of course, to level 2, but there they missed a vital clue. Without it, they could not survive, so Modred laughed at their demise.
The rhymes aren't too bad this time.
There's definitely some virtual rhymes in there. Lot and clock. I think that's the dodgiest one, but at least it doesn't sound really awful as a result of it. I think we'll give this one a pass.
But now a fresh challenge waits beyond the portal. Who could it be? Let's discover. Enter, stranger.
So,
I like the way that Traegard just looks at the camera and says, "Who do you think the next one will be?" You're the host. You're the one on the production team. Why don't you tell us? How are we going to know? Of course, the truth is, these days, everybody knows. It's episode 7, which means it's time for Akash.
Name yourself, please.
My name is Akash Ramtari.
Very well, Akash. Call your advisors and let them introduce themselves.
Tanya, Carrie, and Kirsten.
yes, the infamous Akash. I had to watch this for the notes, obviously, and I didn't remember it from the original broadcast. It's usually you that gets all upset when they say things like leopard and stuff like that. I was fucking raging when I watched this.
You were goblin horning raging, were you? Okay.
Incredibly so.
When I'm watching this team, my general reaction isn't so much apoplexy, it's just wonder. As in, I wonder how the hell this lot were able to get past the auditions.
Again, we're going to do our best not to punch down, but this team is... It's difficult not to judge them by adult standards when you're looking back on it as an adult. You have to remember to put it in context with their peers. But even when measured up against their peers, this team are ridiculous.
There are some pretty bad teams in the first couple of seasons, but they still stand out for sheer hopelessness. It's not so much slapping down, it's just stating objective facts. They are not capable of the task that they're set here, and they really shouldn't have been allowed into the series, if the truth be told. Although, having said that, an enormous part of Nightmare fandom culture comes from laughing at this team. So we would be poorer for not seeing them.
This is basically an entire quest assignment sidestep to your left.
Very much so.
So as we said, our team today is one that would go down in infamy amongst Nightmare fans, to the extent that the mere mention of the name Akash causes Martin O to make strange involuntary sounds. Dungeoneer Akash Rammed Harry is joined by I think we should be fair here and say Akash is
actually a fairly good Dungeoneer. I will say that. Everybody looks at him and remembers him as terrible because he was in a terrible team. In the end, a Dungeoneer is only as good as his advisors can be. But where he has to be assertive, as we'll see in an early scene, he actually is really good. The problem is there aren't enough situations where he can take command and he's left depending on advisors who aren't really up to it.
He's joined by advisors Tanya Carter from Sutton in Surrey, along with Carrie Saunders and Kirsten Arnold from Worcester Park in Surrey. Treguard gives the rules rundown and sends Akash through the door.
That is the high point of their quest. That is as well as they play at any stage in the entire game.
Where am I?
You're in a room with 4 doors. 3 of them are open and one of them in front of you says fire exit. Okay.
Oh, a simple decision, team. It's up to you to make the right choice.
This is the only time I've ever been surprised to see the 4-door chamber appear at the start of a quest, as until now every quest in Series 2 has begun with the Wheel of Fate. I did originally think that maybe this was a script that was carried over from Series 1, but there's stuff that happens later on in the episode that kind of negates that theory.
It's never been formally corroborated, so I can't say for absolutely certain that it's true, but I'm fairly sure it's true. The reasons why this quest takes such a strange format compared with all the others in season 2 are much more complex than just a carryover. You just replace the 4-door chamber with the Wheel of Fate, and the rest carries on as normal. I will explain when we get to the clue room, not here yet.
It is the more atmospheric, dimly lit version of the chamber, though, which is much nicer looking than the version we had throughout Series 1. The 2 doors in front are both open with no markings. The rear left door to portcullis over, and the rear right door is open, marked fire exit. And we all know what that means. With no other clues aside from Treguard telling them to make the right choice, the team guide Akash through the front right door.
Where am I?
Oh, you're in a sort of... Explain, Kirsten, I can't tell. There's a face to your left, a great big face.
Not a lucky stop for you, team. This is a troll. Don't try to escape, Akash. The only fortunate thing about this encounter is that trolls aren't overburdened with intelligence. You'll just have to use your wits.
Now, this is the part we were talking about earlier. You know, we'll give credit where credit's due. Akash does take the initiative, which is probably a good thing since all his team of advisors can do at the moment is sit there giggling.
That sounds fair. So we get this rather nonsensical sequence where they've got no spells, they've got no objects, they've got nothing to fight the troll with, so they just decide to tell him that Akash isn't good to eat.
Hello. I'm not good to eat.
Are you sure? You look very tasty to me.
I taste horrible.
Oh, I expect you taste delicious.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Oh, well, I suppose. If you say so, better not be too late, not with my stomach.
And in return for not giving him a stomachache, the troll gives Akash the spell Truth and then tells him to shove off.
Now, again, this is speaking in light of what I'm going to reveal in the clue room later. That is one of the worst scenes in the entire second season. Firstly, it's the most cheaply earned bit of magic in the history of Nightmare, bar none. And it makes an utter nonsense of all the other scenes featuring the troll. All the other times he appears, the dungeoneer has to do something to get past him. Here, he just has to say, "Don't eat me." I will discuss more about this, but again, please wait for the clue room.
Where am I?
You're in a room and there's a bomb, so I better get out soon.
This team seems to hunt for trouble. Quickly now, the fuse is running.
No, cut the jingle. I want to talk about this. I need to talk about this bomb room. This is a prime example of how not to do a bomb room. They surmise a need to get him out there quickly. They literally leave him standing there whilst they and ah over exactly what needs doing. I don't want to punch down here, but holy fucking shit. How fucking difficult it is to say turn left, walk forward.
Okay, there's a door.
Take one step.
Quickly.
Take one step forward. Left, one step forward. Akash, quick, one step forward and run. Just run.
I actually want to talk about this scene as well. It's unusual when we talk about a bomb room because there's usually not a great deal to them. But I always remember this scene very vividly because there was something very, very odd about it. Already, the way things had happened so far, there was something very odd about it. I saw it when it first showed back in 1988, and I remember a sort of brain phase effect because Freygaard does this aside to the camera where for years I remembered him as saying, "It seems we have a team looking for trouble here." But I always remember that aside, and I always remember blinking, thinking, there's something really off key about this episode. There's something really weird going.
Do you know what it reminds me of? Have you ever seen the Rocky Horror Picture Show?
Afraid so.
During the dinner scene, when Dr. Scott turns to the camera and said,
"I knew he was in with a bad crowd, but it was worse than I imagined."
Yeah.
That's what it always reminds me of every time I see it.
For a start, that is a very, very premeditated aside. The camera's already waiting on him, and Hugo knows exactly where the camera's poised.
Where am I?
You're in a room and there's a table in the middle of the room and a door on your left and right.
Anyway, so on to the fireworks factory.
Fireworks factory!
It's the level 1 clue room, and on the table are a cauliflower, a bottle of poison, a jewel, and an ice pack. The ice pack was very obviously made sometime in the 70s, and just to avoid any confusion, it has the word ice pack written on it in permanent marker, the same permanent markers that would be used to blank out any brand names and trademarks. I am quite glad it did say ice pack, though, because I would not have known that was an ice pack, personally.
Wouldn't have had a hope, no, absolutely not. I suppose as it's supposedly in the north of England in the middle of winter, when it broadcasts, it's completely absurd. But
there's something made out of galvanised rubber as well.
Yeah. Something like that, galvanized rubber or plastic or something like that.
I mean, this is just beyond the pineapple paradox, really, isn't it?
Freygaard tells the team that they're on the right track at last, but don't worry, they'll soon be on the wrong one again. Yeah, as I say, I'm going to come to the crux of the matter very shortly whilst we're discussing this scene. It will take a little while to talk about it. For now, let's go into the riddles.
I am Igneous of legend.
The first riddle is: once was pride so great a man that the monarch bade the waves of retreat. Name me now this foolish king whose pride was soaked just like his feet.
Now we get something interesting and clever enough that I can't help but think that somebody behind the scenes had told the team to do it.
The team do not know the answer, first thing I have to make clear. And in fact, because of the way the scene is structured, we never hear the answer. The answer to the riddle is King Canute, the Danish king of England from about 30 years before the Norman conquest. But we don't get told that here. Instead, the spell that they got from the troll just happens to perfectly fit the situation they're in, and so they end up casting it in lieu of a riddle answer.
Spell casting. T-R-U-T-H.
Accepted.
That is very, very telling and is at the heart of why there is a massive conspiracy theory surrounding this quest. As I say, the riddle answer is King Canute, but the way it's built, question's been worded is not fair because it makes Canute sound like he's got some kind of god complex. It's actually not true. He did stand on the shore and well, in fact, he sat on the shore in his throne and he did try to command the tide not to come in, but he wasn't doing it to demonstrate that he was so powerful that he could control the tide. He was doing it to demonstrate to his courtiers who were very sycophantic and thought he could do anything. Look, I'm just a man. If I sit on the beach here telling the waves what to do, they're going to ignore me.
In fairness, though, it is quite a common misconception to the extent that we have a saying, the arrogance of King Canute.
Yeah, but it's wrong. I do think you shouldn't be encouraging urban myths.
There are also earlier parallels in Celtic stories of men who commanded the tides, and I'm going to butcher these pronunciations.
Okay.
St. Illtyd? Is that right?
St. Illtyd. Basically, in Welsh, the letter Y and the letter U got inverted pronunciation. If it's a Y, you pronounce it the way that the English would pronounce a U. If it's a U, you pronounce it the way you pronounce a Y. So I'd say it would be Illtyd.
St. Illtyd of Glamorgan and...
Melgwyn.
Thank you. Melgwyn.
Melgwyn, not Gwyn. Gwyn. Melgwyn.
What you said.
Cheers. This guy can speak Welsh so fluently, listeners.
They effectively passed on the question.
I did really, yeah. So, second riddle.
Can I just say, listeners, wait until you hear this. You thought an ice pack was bad? You thought leopard was bad? Wait until you hear their answer.
Yeah, I'm going to slightly disagree with you on that. Only very slightly. Only very, very slightly. With this invention, you move great rocks. Without it, roads may just as well be footpaths. What is it? Now, the correct answer is, of course, the wheel. Mr. H, please tell us what answer they gave.
They said bulldozer. At this point, when I was doing the notes, I had to take a break. I had to get up and walk away because I was doing it quite late at night and I was shouting.
So I'm going to disagree with you slightly here. You would say that's worse than leopard. I don't think it is. If you think about the way that the riddle is worded, and especially the mention of moving great rocks, and suddenly bulldozer actually does make a kind of sense. It's not a good answer. I want to stress it is a bad answer, but it's not as bad as leopard was when you're supposed to say armor. I think because leopard just comes out.
At least leopards were actually around at that time.
Yeah, but leopard.
At least
as
leopards
an answer,
were actually around.
About a riddle about armor. A word like leopard just comes completely out of left field. There's just absolutely no reason for it to be in there. At least here, when you're mentioning rocks, a bulldozer does make a kind of sense. It's still a bad answer because it's the wrong time zone, amongst other things. But I don't think it's as bad as leopard was. It's still a bad answer.
In the Middle Ages,
it still makes me cry.
Middle Ages, people did wear leopard skins at least. There were no bulldozers in the Middle Ages.
They didn't wear leopard skins in England, mate. A bulldozer is a bad answer. Okay, and it still makes me cry. Okay, but it's not as bad. It's not as bad as leopard. That's all I'm saying. It's not as bad as leopard.
It is. It is worse than leopard.
No, it's not. They said bulldozer. It's, as I say, it still makes me cry. It's still a bad answer. I still rate leopard well.
For fuck's sake.
They don't do very well with the third riddle either. One heavenly body rules the day, but tell me now which moves the waves. The answer is, of course, the moon.
The sun.
That's me banging my head against the table.
I can confirm he is genuinely hitting his head on the table. We can mock them. We can mock this team for not knowing that the answer is the moon. But, ladies and gentlemen, have you ever heard of a fellow who used to work on Fox News Channel in America called Bill O'Reilly?
Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. You can't explain that. You can explain why the tide goes in.
Tide goes in, tide goes out.
See, the water, the tide comes in and it goes out, Mr. Silverman.
Maybe
it always
it's
comes
Thor
in,
on top of Mount Olympus who's making the tides go in and out.
No, but you can't explain
that. A scam and a myth are the same.
You can't
myth
explain
and religion are the same thing. It doesn't matter if I can explain it.
It doesn't?
That doesn't mean that an invisible magic man in the sky is doing it.
And you're free to believe that.
You see, ladies and gentlemen, even people who earn tens of millions of dollars a year do not know that it's actually the moon that pulls on the sea, create the tides.
This is the one time I'm going to let you have a little bit of politics in here.
It's some basic science lessons. That's not politics.
1 is the score. Igneous tells Akash that his quest is for the sword. They may not wield it. And then he's like,
I scorn you.
I scorn them too, Igneous.
This is the first time in level 1 that somebody only got the score of 1. I assumed that the War Monsters were always going to say, I scorn you, every time somebody got 1. It happens in the next quest. Granitas, I think it's Granitas, says the same thing. He says, I scorn you for doing such a feeble job. At the same time, yeah, it has to be said, the way that Igneous delivers it, the voice actor himself is actually pretty annoyed with this bunch. Yeah. So with no clues from Igneous, the team take the poison.
Why?
and the jewel, the cauliflower, goes in the knapsack.
Several years later, Akash did sign the guest book on Nightmare.com and explained that his team felt they could use the poison to defend themselves in some way.
How?
Then he very quickly changed the subject.
Nicholas Lamb, who was running the Nightmare site at the time, did want to make clear that he wasn't convinced that that genuinely was Akash. It might have been him, it might not. But either way, how do you defend yourself with a bottle of poison? Let's get into the specifics of why this quest is a source not only of mockery, but also of controversy. I stress again, I've never been able to get a solid corroboration of this, but there is a pretty big conspiracy theory surrounding Akash's quest, surrounding the fact that the team were unable to get any of the riddles right. The suggestion is that the truth spell was actually given to them retroactively by shuffling the first couple of scenes of the quest subsequently to the clearing scene. Basically, they recorded another scene later and slotted it in earlier.
That makes sense.
It has never been officially confirmed, I want to stress, by anyone involved, but there are reasons why I think it is true. Firstly, as we've noticed, there's no Wheel of Fate scene. We've already commented on that. It's the only quest from which it's missing in season 2. That suggests to me that the 4-door chamber was put inside to replace it because they needed to add in an entrance to the troll scene. When they originally recorded the Wheel of Fate scene, the cabin ledge probably wasn't on the wheel. Secondly, the key one for me is the effect of the truth spell. Spells are like clue objects, really. They're given out with a view to what is going to be needed later in a level. For instance, if there's a bridge broken, you just happen to have a flight spell. But in this situation, how could the crew possibly have known in advance that the team wouldn't know the answer to any of the riddles? If they didn't know that, and there wasn't some kind of engineering going on, this has got to be the luckiest coincidence in series history that this particular team was doled out this particular very generic spell.
But then again, yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. But if that was the case, why go to the trouble of filming an extra scene? Why not just give them the answer? I mean, that particular riddle is quite a hard riddle, so maybe not give them that answer, but give them the answer of the moon for what controls the tides or whatever.
Well, that would be simpler, but I still have to come to the same point. There's still no plausible explanation for any of the things that we did see.
Oh yeah, I completely agree with you.
Apart from somebody's been fiddling. Maybe they just did it just to bulk out the quest a bit more.
Maybe. I completely agree that's the only possible explanation, but yeah, maybe you're right.
Thirdly, since when did the troll ever have any magic? Fourth, following on from that point, I did touch on this earlier, the troll was talked around incredibly easily to convince him not just to let Akash go, but actually to give him a spell.
Yeah.
As I said before, this is the most cheaply earned spell ever. It makes a nonsense of every other appearance by the troll, where objects or magic are required to get past him. There's a team later in, I think it's Team 12. They've got to use a talisman of invisibility to get past him. Why did they bother? Why didn't they just say to the troll, "Oh look, just don't eat me, okay? I don't taste nice," and then walk out? Not only would they let them pass, this suggests, he'd also give them a spell as a thank you as well.
That also explains why Akash is so confident when talking to the troll as well, because he's been primed.
It does look like it, doesn't it? He does seem very ready for it. And there's yet another reason. A member of the first team in season 3 was on the Nightmare forums in the early 2000s. He revealed in the early 2000s that they died on the Snake Tongue Bridge in the Serpent's Mouth cabin originally, but they were allowed to refilm it because the next team hadn't arrived yet. So let's refilm this rather than waste precious recording time in the studio. This could easily have been the same situation because Akash's team had in reality only been there for about 3 or 4 rooms. It's entirely possible the next team hadn't actually got to the studio yet. So they decided to let them try and carry on. The whole thing does reek of contrivance, and I do think some kind of fiddling was going on to bulk out the start of the quest and to slot in a spell to get them past the War Monster.
And do you know if it made for better television? I'm all for it.
Crap. Where am I? You're in the room and above you there's a sort of green...
Get out quick, team! It's the great corridor of the catacomb. And what's worse, something is coming.
Oh yes, it's the great corridor of the catacomb. But it disappoints time after time. Traeger talks it up, but it just ain't got the stuff. And yes, that was a virtual ride. It's been a while since we've had to use that jingle. Today the corridor seems to be occupied by a close cousin of Slimer from the real Ghostbusters.
The creature is actually called a Todadile. And like most threats in the Great Corridor of the Catacomb, just like the Shadow Demon that we saw in season 1, it doesn't really do a great deal except sort of hang about at the far end of the corridor.
It's a presence. It's better than a sound effect. The image of a sword appears in the nearest door on the left, whilst the chalice appears in the nearest door on the right. And for this bit, it just says in my notes, hell.
Yeah, this actually, for me, is probably the worst of the lot of all the things I did wrong. This is actually worse than not having the answer to any of the 3 riddles. How on earth do you manage to forget what your quest object is 1 room after you were told about it? And it was even late in that last room that you were told what your quest object is. And I think they were extremely lucky here that Akash was allowed to swap directions, because he clearly reached the threshold of the wrong door.
Let's be slightly fair to them. We do know there was a gap between filming each room. It's possible they could have forgotten. But then why didn't they write it down?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say in response to that. That's what the pads and the pen and the paper is for. One of the first things you should do is make a note of what your bloody quest is.
Side step to the right, keep going. To the right.
What's your quest? What's your quest?
The sword. Find the sword. To the left. To the left. Side steps to the left.
They got away with it completely, but that is actually the worst mistake ever. They should have been sent through that door because they did cross the threshold.
I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to do T-shirts. You know, you get those T-shirts with the tick boxes down the side. I'm just going to do one that says, they said, ... And then it'll be like, leopard, bulldozer.
Let's go for the chalice door where we've got on the quest for the sword.
Where am I? You're on the edge of a cliff. And
Careful now, team. You must get past Lilith. And the dear lady is obviously not at her best.
At my best. At my best. So you have come to gloat, have you, Treguard?
Lilith's obviously feeling the effects of last night's dungeon juice and isn't really in a fit state to welcome visitors. What Lilith could really do with is a nice 1970s ice pack.
Hands up at home. I know you can't really see this, but hands up at home. Anybody who didn't realise back in the clue room that Lilith was going to have a headache for one reason or another. Who hadn't already guessed that because of the ice pack being on the table? It was so obvious, and they chose the poison instead.
Oh, what have you got for a really gigantic hangover? Headache, Akash. No ice pack?
Akash. Yes?
You are an intruder. You guileless greenhorn. How dare you come in here pretending to be what you are not? Ooh.
Akash, offer her the gem.
I have no time for boys like you.
Do you want the gem?
So crumble ledge and Akash too.
Oh my god.
Nasty. Poor old Akash. You really needed more information from Igneous Girls, because without it, you chose the poison instead of the ice pack.
Oh, what a shock.
So 2 things to note here. One is the exclamation of, oh my god.
Oh my god.
Which I'm quite surprised they were allowed to get away with on kids' TV in those days. The other thing is we get another ooh nasty from Treguard, so I think that brings the count up to 3.
Correct, yeah. There's one when Team 4 in season 1 were blown to bits. Once in response to one of Cedric's insults directed at Folly, and now this one. Somehow, even without a clue from the War Monster, the ice pack just screamed out to be taken. Because it's such an unusual object.
Maybe it was the huge word ice pack written on it. But no, it was so out of place, wasn't it? It was so out of place that I would have taken it just to see what happened.
Yeah, it's just not generic enough to be the red herring clue. On a plus side about this scene, it's an excruciating scene to watch because this is where they finally get what was clearly coming to them.
And everyone knows it's going to happen here.
Yeah, Mary Miller plays it really well. You really do feel like she genuinely does have a hang-up, a headache.
I love that bit.
It's a very good demonstration of the arrogance of Lilith. She's never heard of Akash before. She's never spoken to him before. As soon as he introduces himself, her arrogance is such that she's so desperate for treatment for her headache that she convinces herself that she summoned him to cure her headache.
What else can we say? We generally try to look at the positives for each team. Akash himself, as we said, isn't a bad dungeoneer, but he's saddled with some of the most ridiculous advisors in the history of the show.
He can't be a good assertive dungeoneer because he doesn't really seem to know what's going on because they're not really telling him. I don't think at any stage in the bomb room, for instance, that Akash actually realised that there was a bomb there. There was a description given by one of the advisors, but it was so hurried that I don't think he followed it. So when you don't really know what's going on, whether you're an assertive dungeoneer or not, makes absolutely no difference.
The unforgivable thing about this team, though, is that they don't pay attention.
The familiar one, isn't it?
The corridor of the catacombs, as you said, that was just dire.
That was the nadir. Because there was no consequences for it, people tend to overlook it. But I actually think that was the worst mistake. And they were very lucky they were let off.
It has given us something that we don't often get, though. It's given us something interesting that's happened in the corridor of the catacombs. Not good, but interesting.
Yeah, I don't think we can really count that as a redeeming feature, really, can we? Nice try, but no.
One main thing, though, we have to remember about this team, though, is they said Bulldozer.
They said Bulldozer! But at least I didn't say leopard.
Akash and his team are reunited on the path home as Treguard accepts the next challenges.
Name yourself, please.
Neil Payne.
Very well, Neil. Call your advisors and let them introduce themselves.
Jason. Craig. Mark.
The 7th team of Series 2 consists of Dungeoneer Neil and advisors Craig, Jason and Mark from Newark. I don't know why my voice did that then.
Well, if you don't know, I'm not going to be able to tell you. It's your voice box. I haven't got control of it.
After the rules run down, Neil is given the Helmet of Justice and sent through the door.
Our old mate Jake Collins, who used to write the Ice Shield fanzine, when writing for it, he once pointed out that Newark is an anagram of a word that rather sums the team up. I'll let you figure out for yourself what he meant by that. They're not the brightest lights in the bulb factory.
Where am I?
Right, Neil,
Yeah?
you seem to be in a room with a big, tunnel in front of you.
Okay.
Hold on a minute. There's something round.
It's changing shape all the time.
Yeah, you've got this...
Some kind of...
Come on, Neil. Use the break and learn your fate.
Stop!
It's the 4 doors stop.
The doors are highlighted with quest objects. There's the chalice, the sword, the shield, and of course there's a fire exit. Before the team can choose, though, they have to deal with Folly.
As for Folly, one assumes he's here merely to add to the confusion.
Confusion? Me, Master? Never.
He runs through the quest objects and tells the team that the fire exit is not much of an adventure unless you're a salamander, which backs up our belief that the fire exit leads to a fiery death.
My advice is follow the sword. It's the hardest, but then the others aren't any easier.
I can't help feeling that we should be holding up the double entendre sign when he says that. He also tells them if they do follow the sword, they should look for the Red King. As this is the only clue they have, they logically decide to go for the sword. I do rather like the symbols on the doors here, though. It gives the 4-door chamber a rather nice, colourful and more iconic appearance than it usually has.
They seem to have improved the layout of the symbols as well. It doesn't look as chaotic and cluttered as it has done in the past.
Season 1, Team 6 had something somewhat similar, but it did look very messy and disorganised.
So, they go out through the sword door.
Walk forward.
Where am I?
Neil, you're in a room with a time bomb.
Rude here, team, but the bomb's about to go off. Choose quickly. Light or light off.
Be fast on your feet before your life force depletes your bomb room. Bomb room. The presence of food here seems to confuse them a little bit, and they can't decide amongst themselves whether they need to risk getting the food. And it's one of the more chaotic bomb rooms I've seen, but they still handle it better than Akash's team did. Advisor Mark seems almost have a bit of a temper tantrum here. He doesn't help at all by shouting over his teammates, and it doesn't bode well for the success of the team. So they eventually leave the food behind and get their dungeoneer out.
Stop!
Forward. Run.
Where am I? Neil, you're in a room with a door which is filled with rubble, and there's a door to your right, which is...
Those who seek the sword must first dare the serpent. But this is no time for Neil to stand and fight.
It's a new snake again. This one does look like it could potentially be a hazard, as it does in fact get very close to Neil at one point. There's a sound effect here that doesn't seem to relate to anything.
Which one is it?
When the snake starts rearing up by the door.
Turn to your right a little bit. Now, forward.
But it seems to me, the way it's filmed, there's no way that the snake can actually cover the door. Because the way it goes up when it reaches the door, it was almost as if on the recording there's something blocking it.
It's probably inside a glass cage or something. One of the plus sides for this team is they're actually pretty good at manoeuvring. When it comes to the mental side of the game, the intellectual side of the game, they're pretty much a no-hoper. But they are pretty good at getting the Dungeoneer to do what they need him to do. They're not write-offs. They do make wonderfully silly mistakes. Especially in level 2, but they're not completely devoid of balls.
No, they managed to guide him out of this room reasonably swiftly.
Where am I? Neil, you're in a room with a table in front of you with some objects on it.
So we're back in the old style clue room from season 1. On the table, there's a wheel of cheese, a bottle marked potion, a bone, and a knife. Unlike previous quests in the series, Tragon allows a team to take the food before they have been challenged. But as soon as the cheese is in the knapsack...
Prepare for a trial of wits, team. All these must be earned.
I am Granitas of legend. My name is not amusing. Nothing about me is amusing.
Oh dear, thanks to Akash's team not lasting very long, we're having another riddle contest already. First riddle is, who is the Great Wizard of the West?
Well, the answer they give is the Wizard of Oz, and I can see their thinking there.
Yeah, the correct answer is Merlin, only I don't think it is. And given the pop culture reference, the Wizard of Oz is actually a legitimate answer. I don't actually think that Merlin can be said to have been the Great Wizard of the West. Although many legends say that he was Welsh, Merlin is part based on a historical figure. And if I was the producer in this situation, I would have said, you know what, that's fair enough. The historical figure whom Merlin is loosely based was a druid-like bard who lived in the 6th century called Lailoken. And records, as far as we can tell, indicate that he actually lived somewhere near the border between Scotland and England, which would make him the Great Wizard of the North, not the West.
Is it the Wizard of Oz?
Falsehood. Merlin was the truth I sought. Here is my second.
No earthly, earthbound steed am I. My hurdles are the mountains and my racetrack is the sky. Who am I?
And it's Pegasus.
Easy.
Pegasus.
Truth accepted.
Thank you, Jay.
Here is my third.
On Monday, I planted a magic tree. On Tuesday, it grew twice its height. Today, it doubled. On Sunday, it was fully grown. But when? On which day was it half grown?
Right, before we say anything else, this is the point where temporal disruption comes in before the team can give an answer. So we're not going to give you the answer on this episode. We're going to see if you lot can work it out. You can send us a voice message with the answer using a link that I will put in the description for the podcast.
If you've seen the episode before, it's probably best you don't take part, but we've got no way of judging us.
We're doing it on trust. There's no prizes or anything. It's just for fun.
Caution, team. Time, not Granitas, is now the enemy. Temporal disruption now complete. Is one alone the score, or will it be two? And in any case, why should you care? Join us again soon for Nightmare. We'll be waiting for you.
So anyway, let's talk about this episode. It's been entertaining, hasn't it?
Oh, that's been down. You know, it's never been a dull moment in this one. It's just it's not always been for the right reason. As I said earlier, I remember when the episode was first broadcast, it did feel very weird and different. And to be honest, it still feels that way now. Both of these teams seem oddly lacking in astuteness, and there was something about the feel of events that really adds to the suspicion that there was a fix. But at the same time, they've still got their redeeming qualities. Akash, with a decent team to guide them, would probably turn out to be quite a solid dungeoneer. Neil's team, they're good at the manoeuvring. There's potential to work with.
And that's all for this episode of Nightmare. And so I guess that's all for this episode of Temporal Discussion. If you like the podcast, you can follow us on Twitter. We're at NightmarePod. And if you really like us, you can support us on Patreon. We're at patreon.com/NightmarePod. You can email us on podcast@nightmarepod.co.uk. Our website is nightmarepod.co.uk. And remember, we want your answers to this riddle. On Monday, I planted a magic tree. On Tuesday, it grew twice its height. Each day, it doubled. On Sunday, it was fully grown, but on which day was it half grown? Like I said, we'll put a link where you can send voice recordings in the description, and we will play them in the next episode.
But please don't bulldozer us with way too many, because we don't really want another bulldozer. So, until next time, don't have nightmares.
Just watch them instead.
Oh,